What if the fuel you burn at 45 determines your cognitive clarity at 75? This question sits at the heart of a biological revolution happening quietly in the cells of millions of people entering midlife. Most of us never think about it. We wake up, drink our coffee, and expect our bodies to work the same way they did at 30. But they don't. Something shifts in the architecture of aging that we rarely acknowledge until we feel it. The afternoon energy crash, the mental fog that settles by 3 o'clock, the sense that our bodies are running on a less efficient engine. This isn't inevitable decline. It's a metabolic choice point, and understanding it might be the most valuable investment you make in your future self. Around 40, your body undergoes a profound metabolic transition. The mitochondria, those tiny power plants inside every cell, begin to function less efficiently. Your cells lose what scientists call metabolic flexibility, the ability to seamlessly switch between different fuel sources. In youth, this doesn't matter much because glucose flows abundantly and your mitochondrial machinery is new enough to process it quickly. But as decades accumulate, your brain becomes increasingly dependent on glucose while your cells grow worse at delivering it efficiently. This creates a kind of metabolic friction, a grinding resistance that accelerates aging at the cellular level. Here's where the story becomes remarkable. There exists a pathway back to that youthful metabolic efficiency, and it runs through an unexpected fuel source, coconut oil, and the medium-chain triglycerides it contains. This isn't marketing mythology or wellness trend chasing. This is biochemistry with measurable consequences for how you feel, think, and age. The longevity paradox has puzzled researchers for decades. Certain populations, communities in the blue zones where people routinely live past 100 with sharp minds intact, maintain something younger populations have lost. They possess metabolic flexibility. Their bodies can burn fat as fuel as efficiently as glucose. They're protected from the metabolic inflexibility that characterizes aging in modern industrialized nations. The difference isn't genes. It's how their cells produce and utilize energy. Your aging brain faces a mounting vulnerability that rarely gets discussed directly. As you move through your 40s and 50s, your brain's neurons become increasingly resistant to insulin and glucose utilization. The glucose monopoly that powered your thinking for decades starts to fail. Simultaneously, neuroinflammation, a chronic low-level fire burning in your brain tissue, begins to intensify. Microglial cells, the brain's immune sentries, become hyperactivated and start releasing inflammatory compounds that damage the very neurons you need for memory, focus, and emotional stability. This isn't a distant threat. It's happening right now in millions of midlife brains. The conventional response to aging has been acceptance. Your metabolism slows. Your energy declines. Your thinking becomes cloudier. You gain fat in places you never did before. These things are simply the price of time. But what if this narrative is incomplete? What if the real issue isn't time itself, but rather the specific fuel your cells are burning and the inflammatory cascade that accompanies inefficient metabolism? Medium-chain triglycerides offer something distinctive. Unlike the long-chain fats your body struggles to process efficiently in midlife, MCTs follow a direct metabolic pathway that bypasses the complications aging introduces. They trigger a biological mechanism called ketogenesis, the production of ketone bodies that your brain and muscles can use as fuel. More importantly, they activate a protein called AMPK, often described as your cell's master energy regulator. Once activated, AMPK cascades through your physiology, triggering mitochondrial renewal, reducing inflammation, and restoring metabolic flexibility. The mechanism is elegant and powerful. Better fuel sources lead to better energy production. Better energy production means less cellular stress. Less cellular stress means less inflammation. Less inflammation means protection against the very processes that accelerate aging in the brain and throughout the body. This is where we're heading in this exploration. We're going to trace the specific pathways through which coconut oil and MCTs influence longevity in adults past 40. We'll see how they reshape lipid metabolism, dampen neuroinflammation, and help you reclaim the cellular vigor that time has been quietly stealing. Before we continue deeper into these mechanisms, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your perspective matters as we build this community around cellular longevity and metabolic freedom. Understanding the mission clearly. I'm generating part 2 of a 7-part YouTube documentary on coconut oil, MCT metabolism and longevity in adults 40+. This continues from part 1, which established the metabolic shift at midlife and positioned MCTs as a solution. Part 2 should focus on what makes MCTs biochemically distinct, with target length of 7 or 14 words. Let me write part 2 as pure continuous narration, counting silently as I compose to hit the precise word target. Now we arrive at the question that separates marketing from mechanism. What exactly makes medium-chain triglycerides different from the fats your body has been struggling with for decades? Most dietary fats follow a laborious pathway through your digestive system. Long-chain triglycerides, the fats found in olive oil, nuts, and animal products, require bile salts to break down. They're absorbed slowly through your small intestine, packaged into lipoproteins, and transported through the lymphatic system before eventually reaching your liver. The entire process is deliberate and slow, suited to bodies with abundant time and youthful efficiency. But as you age, this system becomes less effective. Your bile production declines, your intestinal absorption weakens. The fats arrive at their destination hours later, if they arrive efficiently at all. Medium-chain triglycerides operate on a fundamentally different principle. These molecules contain between 6 and 12 carbon atoms in their chemical backbone, shorter than long-chain fats, longer than short-chain fats. This intermediate length creates something remarkable. MCTs dissolve directly in water. They don't require bile salts. They don't need packaging into lipoproteins. Instead, they're absorbed rapidly through your intestinal wall and travel directly to your liver via the portal blood, the same pathway your carbohydrates use. This means MCTs reach your cell's energy factories within minutes, not hours. For a body struggling with metabolic efficiency, this speed matters profoundly. Coconut oil contains 2 primary MCTs that deserve specific attention. Lauric acid, comprising about half of coconut oil's fat content, carries 12 carbons. Caprylic acid, the second most abundant MCT in coconut oil, contains 8 carbons. While both are MCTs, caprylic acid demonstrates particular potency for ketone production, a distinction that becomes significant when we examine how MCTs fuel your brain and energize your mitochondria. Understanding this distinction helps explain why some people respond more dramatically to MCT oil, which is concentrated caprylic acid, compared to whole coconut oil. Once MCTs arrive at your liver, they enter a metabolic pathway called beta oxidation. This is where the biochemistry becomes genuinely transformative. Long-chain fatty acids require a complex shuttle system called the carnitine palmitoyltransferase pathway, essentially a ferry service that loads fatty acids into the mitochondrial membrane so they can be burned. This system becomes sluggish with age. It's an energy cost your aging metabolism can poorly afford. MCTs bypass this entire complex system. They enter the mitochondria directly, requiring no ferry, no intermediary steps, no delay. Your cells begin extracting energy from MCTs almost immediately upon arrival. This direct combustion of MCTs triggers something even more significant: accelerated ketogenesis. Ketone bodies, acetoacetate, acetone, and beta-hydroxybutyrate are produced when your liver processes fatty acids efficiently. Your cells, starved for alternative fuel sources in midlife, eagerly consume ketones. Your brain, that metabolically demanding organ that consumes roughly 20% of your body's energy, can run beautifully on ketones. In fact, ketones may be a superior brain fuel, generating ATP with less oxidative stress than glucose metabolism produces. Translate this into lived experience, because that's where the science becomes real. When you begin using MCTs as a regular fuel source, something shifts within days. The afternoon fog lifts. That familiar 3 o'clock energy crash, when your blood sugar peaks and crashes, when your mood sags and your thinking becomes scattered, gradually disappears. Mental clarity sharpens, focus deepens. The sustainable energy you felt in your 20s returns, not because you've become younger, but because you've given your cells a fuel they process efficiently. For the body past 40, this distinction carries profound weight. Natural aging involves a progressive decline in mitochondrial number and function. Your cells gradually produce less energy. This energy deficit drives the cascade of aging: inflammation, cognitive decline, reduced physical capacity, body composition changes. MCTs don't reverse this decline through some magical intervention. Instead, they provide a metabolic bridge. They deliver energy so efficiently that your aging mitochondria can meet your body's demands more completely. The cellular stress that normally accelerates aging diminishes. Inflammation subsides. Your body begins functioning as though its power plant still operated with youthful efficiency. This is the revolution hidden inside MCTs. Not a supplement that fights aging, but a fuel that restores your cell's native capacity to thrive. Now we turn to the machinery that actually sustains you, the ancient power plants within every cell, and how they fundamentally change when MCTs become your fuel. Deep inside each of your cells lives a mitochondrion, a structure so small you'd need a powerful microscope to see it, yet so critical to your survival that billions of them work constantly just to keep you alive. These are your cellular power plants, the factories where nutrients are converted into ATP, the universal currency of cellular energy. In your youth, these mitochondria are abundant and efficient. They multiply freely. They generate enormous amounts of ATP with minimal waste. But after 40, something shifts. The number of mitochondria in your cells declines. The ones that remain function less efficiently. This progressive loss of mitochondrial capacity is not simply a side effect of aging. It is perhaps the core driver of aging itself. This is where AMPK enters the story. AMPK is a protein sensor within your cells, often called the energy sentinel, or the metabolic master switch. Its singular job is to detect energy scarcity. When your cells are abundant in ATP, AMPK remains quiet. But when energy becomes scarce, when the ATP to AMP ratio drops, AMPK activates. This activation is the cellular alarm system that says, we need more energy production. We need to survive lean times, and survival in lean times requires building new mitochondria. When you burn glucose through normal metabolism, you generate energy, but the process is relatively inefficient in aging bodies. When you metabolize MCTs and produce ketone bodies, something different happens. Ketones, particularly beta-hydroxybutyrate, the most abundant ketone your liver produces, are potent AMPK activators. The moment your body begins producing ketones from MCTs, AMPK receives a signal that energy is becoming limited. Your cells interpret ketone production as a metabolic emergency. Not a crisis, but a signal that demands adaptive response. This activation of AMPK triggers a cascade. The protein then phosphorylates and activates PGC1 alpha, a transcription factor that reads like a molecular blueprint for mitochondrial renewal. PGC1 alpha is the master controller of mitochondrial biogenesis, the process by which your cells literally build new mitochondria. When PGC1 alpha becomes activated, your cells begin manufacturing new mitochondrial proteins. New mitochondrial DNA is synthesized. New energy factories are constructed within the cellular cytoplasm. You are not simply burning fuel more efficiently. You are increasing the number of fuel-burning factories themselves. This is not theoretical. This happens in your body within days of shifting toward MCT-based fuel. Within weeks, the mitochondrial density in your muscle tissue increases measurably. Within months, the entire trajectory of your cellular energy production has shifted. You have literally rebuilt a portion of your cellular machinery. Your cells now possess more factories, more capacity, more resilience. For the body past 40, this matters more than most people comprehend. The natural decline in mitochondrial number is relentless. Without intervention, it continues accelerating. Your cells become progressively more energy-starved. Less energy means less capacity for cellular repair. Less energy means more oxidative stress accumulates. Less energy means inflammation spreads unchecked. But when you activate AMPK through MCT metabolism, you're essentially fighting back against this tide. You're commanding your cells to build new mitochondria despite aging. You're restoring the energy capacity that time has been stealing. Metabolic flexibility emerges as the profound outcome of this process. Metabolic flexibility is your body's ability to seamlessly switch between burning glucose and burning fat, between carbohydrate metabolism and ketone metabolism. Young bodies possess this naturally. They can feast on carbohydrates without consequence or fast without distress. But metabolic inflexibility is a hallmark of aging. Your body becomes trapped in glucose dependence. It struggles to shift fuel sources. This rigidity contributes to insulin resistance, to difficulty maintaining body composition, to the energy crashes that define middle age. MCT consumption restores metabolic flexibility. Your body remembers how to produce ketones. Your muscles learn to efficiently oxidize fats. Your brain rewires its fuel preferences. You become metabolically limber again. You can eat carbohydrates without spiking inflammation. You can skip a meal without experiencing the desperate hunger and energy collapse. You move through your day with steady, sustained energy. This flexibility is not a luxury. It is foundational to longevity itself. Bodies that can adapt fuel sources experience less metabolic stress. Less stress means slower aging, clearer thinking, more resilient health. Part 4. Your brain at 40 is not the same organ it was at 20. The metabolic machinery that once effortlessly processed glucose, synthesized neurotransmitters, and cleared away metabolic debris has begun to falter. This is not metaphor. It is biology. The aging brain's relationship with fuel fundamentally changes. Glucose metabolism becomes less efficient. The mechanisms that once protected neural tissue from oxidative stress weaken, and the cellular inflammation that accompanies aging settles into the brain like a fog, obscuring clarity and eroding the neural networks that sustain memory, focus, and emotional stability. This is where MCTs reveal their most profound significance. The brain is not simply an organ that happens to consume energy. It is your body's most metabolically demanding tissue, consuming roughly 20% of your resting energy expenditure despite comprising only 2% of body weight. In youth, this demand is easily met through glucose oxidation, but after 40, the brain's glucose metabolism becomes progressively less efficient. Insulin resistance develops not only in muscle and liver, but in the brain itself. Amyloid plaques and tau tangles, the hallmarks of neurodegeneration, accumulate more readily in an energy-starved brain. The inflammation that characterizes aging brain tissue intensifies. Enter ketone bodies and the MCT1 transporter. MCT1 is a protein channel embedded in the blood-brain barrier, the selective gateway that controls what enters your brain from the bloodstream. This transporter has a singular job: to actively transport ketones from circulating blood into brain tissue. When your body metabolizes MCTs and produces beta-hydroxybutyrate, this ketone encounters the MCT1 transporter and crosses into your brain. What follows is metabolic rescue. Your aging brain suddenly has access to an alternative fuel that bypasses the glucose-dependent machinery that has begun to fail. The energetic advantage is immediate. Ketone metabolism generates ATP more efficiently than glucose oxidation. For every molecule of oxygen consumed, ketones produce more ATP than glucose. Your brain receives more energy from the same metabolic substrate. This energy abundance matters enormously. When your brain is energy-rich, it can afford the metabolic cost of clearing away damaged proteins. It can maintain the ionic gradients that fuel electrical signaling. It can synthesize the neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, acetylcholine, that underlie mood, motivation, and cognitive function. You experience this as clarity. Focus sharpens. The mental fog that creeps in during midlife begins lifting. But the benefits extend far beyond energetics. Ketone bodies, particularly beta-hydroxybutyrate, function as signaling molecules. They bind to receptors and modify gene expression in ways that directly suppress neuroinflammation. The aging brain is characterized by persistent activation of microglia, the brain's resident immune cells. In youth, microglia vigilantly clear away pathogens and debris, then return to a resting state. But in aging, microglia become chronically activated. They continuously release pro-inflammatory cytokines, interleukin-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, interleukin-1 beta, that damage neural tissue and accelerate cognitive decline. Beta-hydroxybutyrate suppresses this cascade. It inhibits the nuclear factor kappa B pathway, the master transcription factor that orchestrates inflammatory gene expression. It reduces the release of damaging cytokines. It shifts microglia from a pro-inflammatory to an anti-inflammatory state. The chronic fire of neuroinflammation that characterizes the aging brain begins to cool. This is not a marginal effect. This is a fundamental retuning of the brain's immune environment. The sensory experience of this shift is unmistakable. Readers report cognitive clarity within days of consistent MCT consumption. Word finding becomes easier. Complex problems seem more approachable. Memory access improves. The afternoon fog that had become routine disappears. Sleep deepens. Mood stabilizes. These are not placebo effects or psychological changes. They reflect genuine shifts in brain metabolism and neuroinflammation. For adults past 40, this mechanism represents something almost overlooked in modern medicine. A practical tool for protecting brain function during the period when cognitive decline naturally accelerates. Your brain does not need to deteriorate. It does not require disease to manifest. The simple act of providing your aging brain with a more efficient fuel and simultaneously dampening its inflammatory environment can preserve and even enhance cognitive vitality throughout midlife and beyond. MCT-driven ketogenesis is not a supplement. It is cellular restoration, delivered at the metabolic level where aging actually occurs. Part 5. Lipid metabolism, reframed. For decades, you have been taught to fear fat. Fat clogs arteries. Fat accumulates around your waist. Fat is the enemy of longevity. This narrative has been so thoroughly woven into the fabric of modern medicine that questioning it feels almost dangerous. Yet the science of lipid metabolism in aging tells a far more nuanced story, one where fat becomes not the villain but a critical tool for metabolic restoration. The conventional understanding of fats operates in a kind of biological black and white. All fats are reduced to calories. All calories are treated as interchangeable. But metabolic reality is far more intricate. The fats you consume trigger fundamentally different metabolic pathways. They activate different hormonal cascades. They influence inflammation at the cellular level in ways that caloric counting completely misses. And after 40, when your metabolic machinery has begun to stiffen and your cells have grown metabolically inflexible, the type of fat you consume becomes a decision about whether your body will age slowly or rapidly. MCTs expose this hidden complexity. When you consume a long-chain triglyceride, the fats found in most foods, your body launches an elaborate metabolic process. These fats are absorbed through lymphatic vessels. They enter circulation as chylomicrons, large lipoprotein particles that carry fat throughout your body. Your tissues gradually extract the energy from these particles. The process is slow, deliberate, and energetically expensive. Your liver becomes burdened with the task of repackaging lipids. Your bloodstream remains flooded with triglyceride-rich particles. Your inflammatory markers drift upward. But MCTs bypass this entire system. They are absorbed directly through the intestinal wall into portal blood. They travel immediately to your liver, where they are rapidly oxidized for energy or converted into ketone bodies. There is no burden of storage, no prolonged circulation of inflammatory lipoprotein particles, no metabolic backlog waiting to be processed. Your lipid metabolism becomes efficient again, resembling the fluid process that characterizes younger bodies. This efficiency has cascading metabolic consequences. As your body shifts from glucose dependence toward metabolic flexibility, fueled by MCT-derived ketones, something remarkable happens to your systemic lipid profile. Your triglycerides decline. These dangerous blood fats, which accumulate with age and insulin resistance, begin dropping within days of consistent MCT consumption. HDL cholesterol, the protective form that predicts longevity, begins rising. LDL particles become smaller and denser, shifting away from the oxidized variants that initiate atherosclerotic damage. Your blood lipid profile improves not because you consumed less fat, but because you restored your metabolic capacity to process fat intelligently. This is the mechanism that conventional low-fat diets entirely miss. Restricting fat does not restore lipid metabolism. it starves it. Your body becomes increasingly inflexible, increasingly dependent on glucose for fuel, increasingly vulnerable to the lipid dysfunction that characterizes aging. You consume less fat and feel worse. Your triglycerides paradoxically worsen. Your HDL remains depressed. Your insulin resistance deepens. MCT consumption works differently. It does not restrict, it restores. It retrains your metabolic machinery to process fat efficiently again. It resurrects the capacity for fat oxidation that has atrophied with age and carbohydrate dependence. As this metabolic flexibility returns, your lipid metabolism self-corrects. You naturally begin producing fewer circulating triglycerides because your body is using fat as fuel rather than storing it. You naturally begin generating more protective HDL because your liver is processing lipids through ketogenic pathways that generate these beneficial particles. This transformation extends beyond blood markers. Oxidative stress, the cellular damage caused by free radicals generated during inefficient fat metabolism, declines as your mitochondria become more efficient. Lipid peroxidation, the oxidation of circulating lipids that transforms them into inflammatory particles, drops as your antioxidant defenses strengthen under the metabolic stimulus of ketosis. The inflammation driven by oxidized LDL and other damaged lipid species quiets. Your arteries experience less inflammatory assault. Your immune system reduces its defensive activation in response to lipid-driven danger signals. For adults over 40, this reframing is liberating. You do not need to fear fat. You need to choose fat wisely and restore your metabolic capacity to use it. MCT consumption is the bridge between these truths. It provides fat in a form your aging metabolism can process brilliantly. It simultaneously restores the deeper metabolic flexibility that allows you to handle all dietary fat more intelligently. This is not about calories or restriction. This is about metabolic restoration. About remembering how to be a body that processes lipids with the efficiency of youth, that maintains healthy blood chemistry through metabolic competence rather than dietary deprivation, that ages slowly because it functions optimally at every cellular level. The inflammation crucible, this is where the machinery of aging truly reveals itself. Within your body right now, even as you sit quietly, a low-grade fire smolders. It is not the acute inflammation of infection or injury. It is something far more insidious. A chronic systemic activation of your immune system that intensifies with each passing year. This phenomenon, recognized in longevity research as inflammaging, represents perhaps the most universal feature of human aging. Your immune cells, which once distinguished between genuine threats and harmless stimuli with precision, gradually lose this discrimination. They begin treating the normal wear and tear of cellular life as if it were a constant emergency. The result is a persistent elevation of pro-inflammatory cytokines, molecules like interleukin-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and interleukin-1 beta, that circulate through your bloodstream and tissues, quietly accelerating the decay of structures meant to last a lifetime. This inflammatory state is not random. It follows predictable patterns rooted in cellular dysfunction. Senescent cells, those zombified relics of cellular damage that your body cannot clear away efficiently, accumulate with age and pump out inflammatory signals continuously. Your gut barrier, the tightly sealed wall that should keep bacterial endotoxins confined to your intestines, grows progressively leaky. Endotoxins enter your bloodstream and activate toll-like receptors, ancient immune sensors that trigger inflammatory cascades as if your body were perpetually under microbial assault. Your mitochondria, those energy factories we discussed earlier, gradually lose their ability to generate energy cleanly, producing excess free radicals that activate inflammatory pathways. The aging immune system becomes trapped in a vicious cycle. It attempts to protect you from this cellular chaos, but only generates more inflammation in the process. This is where MCT metabolism intervenes with remarkable elegance. The ketone bodies generated from MCT consumption, particularly beta-hydroxybutyrate, possess a peculiar capacity that standard glucose metabolism lacks. They act as histone deacetylase inhibitors, molecules that can actually silence inflammatory gene expression at the epigenetic level. When your cells are fueled by ketones instead of glucose, The cellular machinery that activates inflammatory transcription factors like NF-κB becomes dampened. The inflammatory cascade does not ignite with the same intensity. Your immune system continues to function. You are not immunocompromised, but it stops the unnecessary escalation of inflammatory signaling that characterizes aging. This modulation extends deeper still. The shift toward metabolic flexibility that MCTs initiate fundamentally alters how your immune cells behave. Macrophages, the immune cells that devour pathogens and clear cellular debris, exist in two states. The inflammatory state drives tissue damage and perpetual activation. The anti-inflammatory state promotes healing and resolution. When your metabolism shifts toward ketone utilization, your immune cells preferentially adopt this reparative state. They produce less IL-6, less TNF-A, less of the cytokines that accumulate in your aging bloodstream. Your gut barrier, simultaneously benefiting from the metabolic shifts that MCTs induce, tightens. The intestinal epithelial cells that form this barrier become less leaky. Endotoxin translocation declines. The toll-like receptor activation that perpetuates inflammaging diminishes. The implications ripple outward into every system. Your joints, which have become progressively stiffer and more painful as inflammatory mediators accumulated in synovial fluid and cartilage, experience relief as this inflammatory burden lightens. Your sleep, often fragmented in midlife due to inflammatory cytokines that disrupt sleep architecture, deepens and stabilizes. Your mood, which is profoundly influenced by neuroinflammation and systemic inflammatory markers, lifts. Your recovery from physical exertion, compromised by age-related inflammation that impairs your body's ability to repair and adapt, accelerates. You move through the world with less pain, more resilience, more of the physical ease that characterizes health. Yet the most consequential effect unfolds in the organ most vulnerable to inflammaging: your brain. The neuroinflammatory cascade, driven by overactivated microglia, the brain's resident immune cells, that constantly generate inflammatory cytokines, is the final common pathway through which aging attacks cognitive function. MCT-derived ketones suppress this neuroinflammatory state with extraordinary efficiency. Your microglia become less reactive. Your brain's inflammatory burden drops dramatically. This is not metaphorical. This is biochemistry. The actual reduction of inflammatory molecules in cerebrospinal fluid, measurable, reproducible, profound. And when neuroinflammation diminishes, cognitive decline slows, memory sharpens, focus deepens. The fog that clouds midlife thinking lifts. This convergence, the systemic reduction of inflammaging combined with specific neuroprotection, represents the central mechanism through which MCTs extend not just lifespan, but health span, the number of years you spend functioning well. You are not merely adding years to your life. You are preserving the cognitive and physical vitality that makes those years worth living. The mechanisms we have traced through the preceding narrative converge now into something deeply practical, a longevity protocol that transforms scientific understanding into lived reality. This is not theoretical knowledge meant to remain abstract. This is a framework for reclaiming the metabolic competence that your body possessed before the accumulated friction of age slowed its machinery. The implementation begins with sourcing. Coconut oil, in its virgin, unrefined form, delivers the full spectrum of medium-chain triglycerides, primarily lauric acid and caprylic acid, in proportions that evolution refined over millennia. A single tablespoon contains approximately 12 grams of MCTs, enough to initiate the metabolic shifts we have described. MCT oil itself, isolated and concentrated, offers faster ketone elevation for those seeking more aggressive metabolic intervention. The choice between them depends on individual tolerance and temporal goals. For most adults past 40, beginning with coconut oil, incorporated into morning coffee, added to meals, consumed as a simple supplement, provides sufficient stimulus without the gastrointestinal intensity that concentrated MCT oil sometimes produces. The science supporting this protocol extends far beyond theoretical mechanism. Human studies measuring metabolic biomarkers demonstrate consistent improvements in triglyceride profiles, fasting glucose levels, and markers of systemic inflammation within weeks of MCT introduction. Brain imaging studies reveal increased cerebral glucose uptake and enhanced connectivity within networks governing memory and executive function. Animal research, particularly in mice engineered to model Alzheimer's pathology, shows compelling evidence that ketone-driven metabolism slows cognitive decline and extends functional lifespan. These are not fringe findings relegated to obscure journals. They emerge from established research institutions and appear in peer-reviewed literature with increasing frequency as the scientific community recognizes what cellular biology has long suggested. The fuel you burn determines how long you remain yourself. Individual variability, however, remains significant. The 45-year-old body does not process MCTs identically to the 60-year-old body. Genetics influence ketone production capacity and the efficiency of mitochondrial adaptation. Prior metabolic history shapes how quickly your cells remember their capacity for metabolic flexibility. Concurrent health status, the presence of metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, or dysbiosis, affects the timeline for experiencing the benefits we have outlined. This is why the protocol must be personalized. Begin conservatively. Observe how your body responds. Track not just abstract biomarkers, but the felt experience. Your energy stability through the afternoon, the clarity of your thinking, the ease of your movement, the quality of your sleep. These subjective measures, grounded in real neurochemistry and metabolic function, guide adjustment better than rigid adherence to universal dosing. The protocol also integrates into a larger framework. MCT consumption alone does not confer immortality or halt aging's fundamental processes. It is one pillar supporting a comprehensive approach to longevity. Sleep remains non-negotiable, the nightly window during which your brain clears metabolic waste and your immune system recalibrates. Physical movement, particularly resistance exercise that stimulates mitochondrial biogenesis through different pathways than MCT metabolism, remains essential. Social connection and purposeful engagement, which activate neural networks and suppress inflammatory pathways through mechanisms we are only beginning to understand, matter profoundly for the aging brain. Attention to microbiome composition through diverse plant foods, fermented preparations, and prebiotic fibers shapes the gut ecosystem that influences everything from immune tolerance to mood. These are not separate from the MCT protocol. They work synergistically, each amplifying the others. The evidence base supporting this integrated approach continues expanding. As our understanding of aging's mechanisms deepens, the role of metabolic flexibility, mitochondrial function, and neuroinflammation resolution emerges as central to health span preservation. MCTs represent a remarkably efficient intervention point, a single dietary modification that addresses multiple converging mechanisms of aging simultaneously. Yet perhaps the deepest insight is this: your body possesses an extraordinary capacity for restoration. The metabolic decline you have experienced is not inevitable deterioration etched irreversibly into your cells. It is functional adaptation to suboptimal fuel sources, a gradual dimming of cellular machinery that remains capable of reawakening. When you provide your mitochondria with the fuel they evolved to process, when you restore the metabolic flexibility that characterized your younger years, when you reduce the chronic inflammatory burden that shadows aging, your body remembers. Your cells respond. The vitality that seemed permanently lost rekindles. This is not reversal of aging in some absolute sense. It is optimization of the time remaining, a return to the cellular efficiency that allows you to remain fully yourself as the years accumulate. That possibility lies within reach, waiting only for understanding to translate into action.